Hello and welcome to Podcast.init, the podcast about Python and the people who make it great. When you're ready to launch your next app or want to try a project to hear about on the show, you'll need somewhere to deploy it, so take a look at our friends over at Linode. With 200 gigabit private networking, scalable shared block storage, node balancers, and a 40 gigabit public network, all controlled by a brand new API, you've got everything you need to scale. And for those tasks that need fast computation, such as training machine learning models or building your deployment pipeline, they just launched dedicated CPU instances. Go to pythonpodcast.com/linode, that's LINODE, to get a $20 credit today and launch a new server in under a minute. And don't forget to say thanks for their continued support of the show. And don't forget to visit the site at pythonpodcast.com to subscribe to the show, sign up for the newsletter, and read the show notes. And to help other people find the show, please leave a review on iTunes and tell your friends and coworkers. And to keep the conversation going, go to pythonpodcast.com/chat. To learn and stay up to date with what's happening in artificial intelligence, check out this podcast from our friends over at the Changelog.
Practical AI is a show hosted by Daniel Whitenack and Chris Benson about making artificial intelligence practical, productive, and accessible to everyone. You'll hear from AI influencers and practitioners, and they'll keep you up to date with the latest news and resources so you can cut through all the hype.
As you were at the Thanksgiving table with your friends and family, were you talking about the fear of AI?
Well, I wasn't at the Thanksgiving table because my wife has forbidden me from doing so. It's off limits for me, lest I drive her insane because I never stop.
New episodes premiere every Monday. Find the show at changelog.com/practicalai or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Your host as usual is Tobias Macey, and today I'm interviewing Mirek, Mencel, and Patryk Zawadzki about their work at Mirumee, building e-commerce applications in Python based on their open source framework Saleor. So Mirek, could you start by introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Mirek Mencel, and I'm the founder and CEO of Mirumee Software, who built Saleor e-commerce solution. Thank you for having us, Tobias.
And Patryk, could you introduce yourself as well?
Hi, my name is Patryk Zawadzki. I'm the original maintainer of Saleor and its first author, and I'm the current head of technology at Mirumee Software.
And Mirek again, do you remember how you first got introduced to Python?
Yeah, of course. So I was actually first introduced to Python via open source and sort of Django. This was the first project actually that we picked up on in 2009, and this is how we actually have started the company. And at Mirumee we deliberately chose this language due to its more like academic background, I think. And the case was that we were looking for great developers. We wanted to work with really good people, and this is how we actually went with Python. Django was equally important, I suppose. The documentation simplicity and so on, coherency of the code. That was something that we were looking for as a company. So this is it, I suppose. I definitely have heard of Python on my university, but the first real life encounter that was with Mirumee 2009.
And Patryk, do you remember how you first got introduced to Python?
Sure. I used to work as a PHP programmer, as I think many of us did during the early 2000 years. And I was using Python as a side programming language for things that were not really web related. But then I got involved in a project that used Pyramid and pylons. So I got introduced to Python as a web programming language of sorts. And then eventually Django came along. I was moving the same project to Django 0.9, I believe, at the time. And eventually Django became the web framework to use for web projects, so that's where we are today.
And so can you start by describing the types of projects that you work on at Mirumee and how the company first got started?
Yeah, of course. 2009, that was actually when we started the company. It was already 10 years ago, but we started it around a single product. That was back then a fleet management platform. Patryk was actually an employee number one, and what we wanted to achieve is like working with great developers, as I said before, and working on interesting and challenging projects. I was earlier freelancing, and that was mainly around web programming in general, I would say. So yeah, so this is how we have actually started. Then so it's actually fun story is that we didn't want to be involved into e-commerce too much. We always believed back then, at least, that this is really boring, and we didn't want to be part of that. And but at the same time, we had to actually work on one of those projects to actually support our other projects, internal projects, and we quickly learned that it is even more boring that that we originally thought. It was not about boring itself. Actually, we didn't like the way we had to work with that software back then, and there were actually two solutions. I suppose, like, Magento was already becoming a standard, but in the Django world and Python world, there was not much option to choose from. So there was one project, Satchmo, that I remember that actually made us pretty tired, I would say, with with e-commerce. So after that one, we didn't even want to more. We didn't. So we hated that space even more. But we also realized that might be a good niche that we could work on, and we always believe this can be an interesting thing to work with companies selling things online, and this is how we actually got into Suchless, and then we moved into other e-commerce libraries like Prices and Saleor and so on. But we started with with a small project, and then we moved to e-commerce, and we quickly realized we need to write something that we really want to work with, and that is the story, I think.
To add to that, I would say that the projects that we usually select for development are projects that are challenging. We're trying not to be a company where developers come to get bored to death and look for other opportunities. So we try to select things that make us scratch our heads and maybe ask ourselves what the best solutions are, rather than look at established patterns. So yeah, we're looking for projects that are challenging. We mostly do e-commerce stuff, but we do stuff that is borderline e-commerce, like internal systems for the French assembly, for example, that is not a store per se, but uses some of the same technologies. Yeah.
Yes, I think one important thing that I recall as well is that we, since Satchmo actually, and our experiments with Satchless, which was our first e-commerce library, then we also got involved into Django Oscar first versions, and we worked with David Winterbottom back then on one big project that actually Oscar has been originally created for. So the lesson that we learned over that time, actually we turned into Saleor, our own more, I would say, robust e-commerce framework. Suchless was back then just a bunch of interfaces that we believed would be helpful to wrap your own e-commerce bespoke e-commerce system, and Saleor was an implementation of it already.
Yeah, I remember in the early to mid 2000s, e-commerce was sort of this new area that everybody was trying to explore and understand the best way to approach it. And in recent years, you don't really hear much mention of it because it's sort of faded into the background and has just become standard fare. And I'm curious what your sort of current perspective is on the state of the e-commerce industry, and what are some of the sort of new and interesting areas within that problem domain that you've been dealing with?
So I think the e-commerce is, we actually saw maybe 2-3 big waves so far, at least the way we understand it. Magento was one of the first platforms or major open source e-commerce solutions that has been built sort of before the mobile era, and it was purely community sort of work where, for instance, user experience was not that important. Then we got this mobile era when new actually platforms has appeared, and one of which can be probably Reaction. There are a couple of other platforms as well, and now we are seeing push towards like experience driven era, which obviously includes mobile, and we all see huge increase in mobile sales, but it's more about building coherent experiences for the users. They actually, modern customers, they look for interesting and modern ways actually to build relationships with brands, and I think this is really interesting from the technological perspective. This is mainly, I would say, headless e-commerce approach where you expose your API and your actually e-commerce might become like the heart of your entire system, actually merging the data from your physical stores, from different touch points, like obviously your web page and so on and so on. So I think currently we are facing this problem that most brands, they really want to look like Nike, like Warby Parker, and so on. They actually already understand the value behind that, and this is the most important, actually one of the most important things that has to be delivered to the modern customers. The technology in the background itself hasn't changed that much. One thing that has really changed is the approach to data, and data driven e-commerce is currently the way it should be done. We all are looking into data. We are trying to figure out what is the best way to actually meet the customer expectations, and obviously to sell more as well. But I think there is like a middle ground that is really interesting to explore, and that would be my opinion about that.
I think we're overlooking some major milestones that happened in between. Like 15 years ago, there was a question of how do I even pay for my order, because why would I enter my credit card details into a form on a website? How do I trust this person? Who are they? There was no HTTPS. There was, maybe there was HTTPS somewhere, but most websites were just like, not very secure. It was hard to convince people to place an order because of all of the security concerns, and it was very founded in reality because stories of stolen credit card details were just everywhere. I think another milestone was the launch of eBay and then Amazon. So e-commerce for the average Joe in the street. So like people who would never even dream of having their own stores could suddenly sell stuff over the internet. So I think those were very important milestones for e-commerce. And I think even today there are platforms like Etsy who enable people who wouldn't otherwise have a reason to run an online platform, because running your own e-commerce is a costly thing. So if you only have one or two products and they are things that are maybe handmade, so you don't have large stocks of them, so you may only sell like 3 or 5 items per month. So you wouldn't normally want to run your own e-commerce platform for that. So it doesn't scale to the cost doesn't scale to your income. So I think those are also important. So while we as a company are building bespoke solutions for more like lifestyle products, or for brands who already have their presence, I think e-commerce for the regular people, like my parents maybe, it's something that has emerged over the last years and has enabled many people to sell things over the internet.
Yeah, and then there are platforms like Shopify that serve as sort of a middle ground to commoditize the actual implementation of the site and handle a lot of the underlying grunt work of it, and let somebody who is actually sort of at a small scale professional business be able to have an online presence without necessarily having to employ a suite of technical staff to maintain their solution.
Yeah, exactly.
And as part of the work that you're doing at Mirumee, you have a number of different open source projects that you maintain, most notably Saleor, which you mentioned. And I'm curious what your motivation is for putting your time and energy into maintaining these different projects, and providing them as being freely available solutions, and how that plays into your overall business strategy and customer acquisition strategy.
Yeah, this is a really good question, and especially because like going open source was not that obvious 10 years ago. Like we recently, we recently see a lot of interest in open source, and companies start realizing the value. I don't think they all do realize the true value, but let me explain a little bit more. So there are probably like three components of that thinking behind why we actually are so deeply rooted in open source. One is this purely sort of philosophical perspective that sharing is important, especially if you are using a lot of open source. And we were all about open source 10 years ago now, and we will be in the future. So giving back is important, but also we believe that this is the real future of software. And we already saw examples of companies doing that. Back in the days, there were mainly a Linux kernel and companies related to server infrastructure doing that. But as we see over the last few years, more and more companies are moving and releasing some of their software for free as an open source. But that's one perspective. The second one was also quite obvious, I would say. But as a small company here in Poland, but not only in Poland, but providing worldwide services, that was a great way for us to actually get some exposure and basically show how do we build software and what can we do for our clients. This is the practical perspective. But I think that the most important one is that currently looking at the last 10 years is that having open source deeply rooted in your culture actually results with great team and people really caring about the quality of the software. Open source actually also teaches people how to communicate clearly and how not to actually communicate, and you need a lot of empathy actually being a developer, but not only. It is the most important thing in our culture currently, and I can say that it's still mandatory here at Mirumee for people to be involved in open source. And that doesn't mean only that we write our own open source libraries. I think so we also spend time helping other projects to fix problems that we actually need to fix for our own purposes. So I think open source can be a great starting point for the true and deep culture of a business. As a result of being open source, we also have created our own sort of market with big project like Saleor. This actually drives customers, and as you said, that can be a services acquisition channel, but I think this is quite obvious, and I would say it's really important to be honest with that as a company. So if you would only treat this as a bite and a hook, I don't think that would work. And I would also discourage to start like brand new projects if there is something that already fits your requirements. It would be probably more helpful for everyone to just join the ongoing development where you can. Obviously, if there is nothing that helps your purpose, then it will be it's good to probably start the new project. This is actually how we started with Ariadne recently. It's very practical reason. GraphQL world in Python is not really that well developed yet, so we wanted the schema first library, and there is only Graphene currently. And Graphene is more like a language library, and there is a big discussion currently which approach is better. But we believe the schema first is better, and wanted to have something like that. And there was nothing like that in Python. There is something in JavaScript world which is called Apollo. So we wrote Ariadne this way.
Yeah, Ariadne, to add to that, is a GraphQL server for Python. So, as Mirek mentioned, there's the cultural aspect, because working in the open in general improves culture, because everyone sees if you're being a nice person or not, if you're giving valuable feedback or not. So that's one thing. Another is the bait and switch thing that Mirek mentioned, that we don't want our customers or potential users to think that the open source project is just a way to get them to pay us money for consulting. We were very, very cautious when selecting the license for Saleor to be very permissive, to promise people that they can always take their own source code and work on it behind closed doors. And I think the question we get a lot is, doesn't open source threaten our business model? Which I believe it doesn't, because as I've mentioned, we've always wanted to work on challenging products, which means we're not selling software, we're selling our knowledge, we're selling, our experience. So off-the-shelf Saleor will never compete with the bespoke systems that we are hired to build. So there's that.
Yeah, I think that that's definitely something that can be easy to overlook is the fact that as software engineers and developers and people working in the technology industry, the end goal isn't to produce a pile of software, because that doesn't do anybody any good if they don't gain any value from the use of it. And that what we should be driving towards is providing actual user value and business value as a result of the software that we use. And it's just a tool, not an end in and of itself.
That's very true. Yeah, we don't want to be a company that sells software as a solution. We don't want to be a company that just clicks the deploy button on something that is already written. We are here to solve problems and to take challenging projects and deliver them. I think this is also important for our employees. So they want to work on something that brings them joy, that is interesting, and that gives them opportunities to expand their own knowledge. So we want to do stuff that is actually interesting from the engineering standpoint.
And so you mentioned that Saleor came about as a result of a project that you were working on that was using the Django Oscar framework, and that you had some different ideas about how best to approach e-commerce. So I'm wondering if you can discuss a bit more about what the Saleor project offers and how it compares to some of the other solutions that are available in the Python ecosystem for building e-commerce platforms.
Yeah, so it started actually a little bit earlier with Satchmo, but Patryk will be more capable of actually explaining that in details. But one important fact was always that we wanted e-commerce to be interesting again, and interesting for the developers, not for So that was our approach to build tools that we can actually use as engineers to build bespoke e-commerce systems for all those appliances that Patryk just mentioned. But I think, Patryk, you would be better fit for that particular question.
Right. So, as was mentioned before, we did our best not to write yet another e-commerce software stack, because that used to be my work in previous companies, and both me and Mirek thought that this particular domain of software should be solved by then. That was 10 years ago, and we were so wrong about this. But back then, we thought that this was something that was already solved. There were solutions. So eventually, we were approached by a vendor who had a highly customized software built on top of Satchmo. And we've spent a year trying to teach Satchmo new tricks and to fix some stuff that the customer was not very happy about. So that was the first time when we thought that maybe e-commerce was not really done. And then we were cooperating with a company called Tangent in London, who were actually authors of Django Oscar. So we've spent some time working at their offices in London on something that was eventually released as the very first version of Django Oscar. But after we've built some projects using Oscar, we figured out that by the time a project is done from the customer's perspective, so when they say, okay, I'm giving a green light, send this thing to production, we have already customized like 90-95% of the code base. And we were not very content with how Oscar handled the customization process. There was a system of overrides. It felt very hacky at the time, so we thought that maybe we could do this better. So we came up with our own solution, which was called Satchless, because it's a play on words. Less is more, so Satchless was clearly better than Satchmo. So we released Satchless, which was our first approach at building a store. So we thought, okay, these are the parts that will definitely never change. This is the code that you will never have to fork. And we were proven wrong within the first 2 months, I believe. So once again, we took a step back, and we thought, okay, maybe people just want to edit code instead of using plugins and overrides and all of the abstraction layers that are built upon a typical software stack. So we have remodeled Satchless to be a pure Python implementation of common algorithms. And we've started the Saleor project, which was a Django storefront implementation, but it was not as much as a framework. It was more of a project template that you could fork and edit to your heart's content. So that's how Saleor started.
And what are some of the ways that both Satchless, which I know you still maintain, and Saleor have evolved over the time since you first began working on them, and some of the most interesting or challenging tasks that you've been faced with in that process of building and maintaining it?
I would say that maybe it's not as much of a challenge, but we were quite lucky because originally we thought that the only solution to building something that is customizable is to make the code base itself something that you would fork and edit. But then the PWA and headless web applications came along. And then this made it actually viable and possible to build solutions that use a common API backend. Like you treat your own store as if it was a third-party integration, where you only customize the user experience part that is run within the browser or on a mobile device or whichever channel you want to use for sales. So where we are today is we're actually reconsidering how we can make Saleor easier to reuse without modifying any of the backend code. So to make it flexible enough that you can just install Saleor, and the only thing that you need to worry about is customizing the client.
Yeah, I think this is one of the biggest challenges since we wanted to actually address the problem of overbloated e-commerce systems and write something lightweight and something that is easy extendable and something that we can use as developers to build our own bespoke system. Then you quickly face that question, or how much do you want to actually introduce into the platform, into Saleor in this case, and what is actually the common denominators for the projects that we believe are good fit for Saleor. And I think balancing between having enough functionality but not coming with system that most of the customers would use only 10% of is the challenge. And we still want Saleor to be really lightweight, and that is, I suppose, the biggest discussion currently that we have. Like, what should be included, what is not a good fit into Saleor.
And for somebody who is agnostic to the language or implementation environment for an e-commerce solution, what are some of the aspects of Saleor that would make them choose that over some of their other available options?
I think Saleor is still sort of first choice for Python developers, but recently with the second version, we actually turned it into headless e-commerce. So it's all GraphQL driven and very modern. So I would say if you were looking for a solution that doesn't come with a big overhead and the technological debt as well, then Saleor is a great fit, especially if you are looking for the really modern ways of writing front ends these days. I already mentioned GraphQL, but this is quickly becoming, I would say, a standard for JavaScript developers, and it makes their life way better, way easier. But at the same time, it allows to build more engaging user interfaces quicker. So some of the solutions, the old one especially, they already have GraphQL implementation as well, but Saleor has been built with that in mind. That's one thing that I would say. Another one is that, contrary to many other open source software, we at Mirumee really and deeply care about the user experience, and this is also why we are rewriting the whole dashboard currently into a PWA application, and we want this to be really polished and really outstanding. And in our case, open source doesn't mean that we would compromise on UX and just build the internals. We want to deliver polished and complete software that other developers can actually use and build their own experiences with. One thing that I wanted to add is that, which is very important with the open source software in general, is that Mirumee is a company heavily bet on Saleor, and we provide the support and the full actually time team that works on that software. I think it's important. So whenever you choose a platform for the next 5 years, let's say, you can be sure that for as long as Mirumee is there, the platform will be developed, and I think it's really important for businesses.
And as far as building a successful and stable e-commerce platform and project, what are some of the most challenging aspects of building and maintaining that, and how do the technical needs of that platform change as the size and complexity of a business grows?
It's a very difficult question. I would say most of the businesses, they don't change the business model overnight, I would say. So they build additional features and additional integrations around the existing platform. By saying that we wanted this platform, I mean Saleor, to be for developers, we all also mean by that the system is sort of designed to be extensible, but by developers, not by plugins in this case. And so we believe that our solution can easily grow with the businesses. Yeah, I think the biggest challenges that we've seen so far are, I suppose, integrations, and then having everything as an API, like your e-commerce being an API driven and headless, makes it much easier to actually integrate different aspects of your entire ecosystem. And I would say that would be my answer.
To add to that, I would say that many companies, when they start out, if they are fairly small, they tend to model their business processes around the software that they use at the time. So that may not necessarily scale up well. You may not necessarily have the opportunity to use the same process when you're having one customer a day or maybe one customer a week. In a situation where you're having like 3,000 orders placed within an hour, for example. So I would say that the early software choices can be quite limiting when you need to scale out. So I don't believe that it's even possible to predict that and to make the right choices in the beginning. So I would say there are points that you need to identify in your company's lifetime, where you need to rethink your software stack. That maybe it's time to start building the next thing. I mean, if we build software today, we usually use an iterative process, like something like Scrum. So every couple of weeks, you can rethink the whole process and maybe take a slight turn, readjust, and so on. So I would say that it's important to do the same thing around the software and processes that you use. For technical issues, there's things like I don't know, traffic spikes, for example. Your business becomes larger, it attracts more customers, and a single Black Friday sale could completely fry your servers, for example. There's stuff like scaling out fulfillment to handle multiple warehouses, for example, or adding more languages or more currencies to your website, which sounds like something that's easy to do, but often this becomes the blocker that forces the software to be replaced entirely.
I can also add something that might sound unintuitive for the software company that actually creates open source software, but it's important to remember that open source solution might not be the best one for your business initially. I think this is a very important question. So it's reasonably easy to actually spawn a new shop using either any of the available solutions on one of the cheap hostings and so on. But then you might this I mean maintaining this might become your like full-time job within a year or even sooner, and you want to actually avoid that because this is not your core business. So I would encourage to start small and then actually move to more advanced solutions. Open source development is not cheap either. It might actually consume your resources where you should have actually spent them on something else, like maybe marketing or just better front end. And those are all like things that everyone actually should think of starting an e-commerce or selling anything online. That not necessarily the open source is your first choice. Definitely it's the first choice for the brands that are already established, and they need a lot of flexibility, and they need bespoke solutions and a lot of integrations, but not necessarily for all the brands just starting with online sales.
Yeah, I would also say that if you are in the domain that sells commodities, for example, then maybe not having a store is the best solution, because you probably already have a distributors network. So you have a way to put your product in the end user's hands directly or indirectly. But creating an online e-commerce platform that is accessible to everyone on the internet may become a support nightmare overnight. If anything goes wrong, you may be swamped with real people wanting to know what happened to their money, for example. So you may not necessarily have the staff or the skill set to handle that.
And as people are starting to plan out an e-commerce site, what are some of the components or features or user experience patterns that are often overlooked that they might not start to incorporate in the initial phases of the project?
Well, this is probably not something that's user visible, but I would say the most overlooked part is usually testing. So the most common issue that we find where we enter an existing project is that some problems are only discovered by customers in the live environment, and this is the last thing you want to have happening on your site, especially if you are handling money. So you don't want to learn that you're charging some credit cards, but silently, not saving the transaction to your database, for example. But for business needs, I would say support. As I've said, this is something that people tend to overlook. People want to return products, people want to have refunds, stuff is lost in shipping, and someone needs to take care of that. And this is not something that software can help you with. I mean, we can add a button that sends a refund to the credit card, but it won't be able to make the decision whether this should happen or not. So yeah, I would say that customer experience is half the nice CSS and JS that you deploy to your website, but the other half is what happens once I place the order and I have a problem with it.
Yeah, I would also add something that that I have already said before, but it's important to plan out your resources well, where this really moves the needle. Like for instance, spending time and your resources, whether those are like developers or any other people involved on the technical details that works in the backend, probably doesn't make sense unless you need a lot of integrations in the backend that cannot be handled but by platforms like for instance Shopify. So we often see resources being spent where we believe like spend on the things that are not really relevant to the customers, like like as I earlier said. I think experiences and are what people care these days about. And like, to give you an example, also we often come across companies that actually all they want is to change something in the front end, but then they realize that this needs to be done in the back end as well, because the system underneath was not prepared for that. So this is how we think. We want to think about Saleor. We want the backend to be prepared for like different scenarios, and this is where headless helps a lot as well. So you spend your time in the front end and building something nicer to your customer, instead of just changing your views in the backend and playing with the backend code.
And one of the most useful user facing differentiators for a well built e commerce site is the ability to have effective, faceted search and recommendation engines so that it makes it easy to find exactly what it is that you're looking for, and also to have some manner of just easy discovery and unexpected useful surprises as you're navigating the site. So I'm wondering what your best practice strategies are that you've discovered during your client work for being able to build in these capabilities, both for recommendation engines and for useful advice for people who are maintaining the store, for adding effective faceting to the products that they're maintaining.
I would say the biggest benefit I've seen to improving the recommendation engine's output was forcing the customer to actually provide us with all of the sales information and not just the online sales that we're seeing through the online channels. Because one of the problem with building recommendation engines is that there's hardly a one-size-fits-all solution. So you're building something often from scratch to work for a particular domain of products. And to show an example is we've built a recommendation engine for a large bookstore that covered something like 11 million SKUs, like unique SKUs. So we had lots of back and forth between us and the customer on what the order of results should be. And we've quickly realized that they instinctively knew which products were popular because they had the sales info for the brick and mortar stores, but the recommendation engine didn't have access to any of that information. So yeah, I would say that making sure that your recommendation engine has access to all of the data and not just the data that happens to, pass your storefront is the most important part. As for actual tools, we're using a mix of collective intelligence and machine learning and just regular facets where AI doesn't actually add much to the equation, because of course AI is the most popular topic nowadays, but it comes as a cost. So running all of the training the models and running the models is not free. So there are cases where the old-fashioned SQL queries and stuff like Elasticsearch, they perform good enough, so it's not worth spending more money on building something fancy.
Yeah, one thing that we see being a challenge for some of the platforms still is being able to properly also test different approaches, like including A/B testing, of course, and this is where we want Saleor to be better at as well. But yeah, recommendation systems and predictive and personalized shopping is definitely the future. It's part of those experiences that modern customers are actually looking for, and we believe it can work for both sides, not just for the seller. But software is, I think, is getting up, like catching up with that only now. It's all actually currently also that we are working on at our data science team. But I think software still needs to be or get better on just even like simple stuff, as I said, like measuring the performance of approaches that you try.
Yeah, I would say metrics are key to all experiments, not only related to recommendation engines. It's impossible to prove that any solution is better than the other without proper metrics. And it's also important to make sure that what you're measuring is actually the generic fitness of a solution, and not so you're not optimizing for the particular test case that you have at hand. So I think it's tricky, especially with machine learning, which tends to skew towards the test cases that are used the most often. So I don't have an e-commerce example in mind, but I know that Google, for example, struggled with their what was it called? They had a project where they tried to teach their supercomputer to recognize images, and they've eventually learned that the recognition model for sheep actually looked for grass fields instead of actual animals. So it's important to have some test cases that are not on the optimistic route, I would say.
And in terms of uses of Saleor that you've either built yourselves or that you've seen other people use, what are some that you have found to be particularly interesting or innovative or unexpected?
Do you want to answer that question, Patryk? Or?
Well, I can tell you a story of one such project, which was the Assemblée Nationale of France, so the French Parliament, where we were tasked to build hardware and phone line management system on top of Saleor. So that was not a typical store, but in the end, Saleor proved to be a very sound platform to build an ordering system on top of. I know that we have some brilliant customers who work with our design team to build some stuff that is maybe not common, but we also have some companies who customize Saleor on their own, and we only learn about them from feedback surveys that we send from time to time. So maybe Mirek can talk about those.
Yes, I would definitely say that the Assembly National of France, that was an unexpected project, but there are also brands like Room Lab. This is the British platform and they build customized furnitures, and they have incorporated Saleor as their e-commerce backend, and it's not typical because the creator of it's a separate application, and then the e-commerce is just the backend for that application. It looks really good, and I think this is what we also wanted to achieve with Saleor, that you can provide really high quality front end, and then have all the let's say boring e-commerce stuff handled properly by Saleor in the backend. I think one of the most challenging and difficult projects, but also interesting, at least to us, are integrations within bigger systems, and we currently are working on such system in particular that I cannot actually reveal the name of the brand, but it's one of the services. So e-commerce is one of the services that they run within their bigger ecosystem, and you have to actually marry that e-commerce with the CRM system, with the fulfillment system, and authorization, like single sign-up authorization, and all of this is really interesting, and this is where we actually wanted Saleor to fit really well, and I can say that we already see a really good fit, and this is what we're really happy with. But those are the projects that we are especially proud of. You can obviously build your great looking store, like more regular store on top of Saleor, but you cannot build, I suppose, what we are building right now with Saleor, with many other platforms, easily. And I think with Saleor it's pretty easy, and also with the GraphQL API, it's a breeze.
And as people who work in the e-commerce industry and with these various different brands, what are some of the trends that you see and some predictions that you can make as to the future of the e-commerce industry and the direction that it's moving?
That's a tough one.
I think everything, yeah, it's a very tough one, but it's clear that everything is today being called an experience. Like you need to build new experiences for the customers. I think like most of the brands that they realize and they are fully aware these days of the importance of the good design. Everything is moving towards social media as well, and recently Instagram releasing the Instacart is one example, but also smarter and more predictive approach. This personalized experience, this is definitely a trend, and we've seen last year also decline on brick and mortar or high street shops, and I think those will be going towards also more lifestyle and experience driven places. There will be less of them, but they will be serving a little bit different purpose, and the main selling channel would become, I mean, it's going to be online, of course. Would you, Patryk, add anything?
Yeah, I would say that there are still domains that don't fare well in online sales, and one of the problems that remains to be solved is good product visualization, which often means more than having a picture or a rendering of something. There are stories of people who say buy furniture only to realize that the chair is for a dollhouse, for example. So there's a question of how do we ensure that a refrigerator that I'm going to purchase is going to fit in my kitchen, for example, without using a measuring tape, of course. Will these shoes look well with blue jeans? Or there are probably domains I don't even know about their existence. So I would say that convincing customers that the product is what they are actually in need of or what they want to buy is important, because this drives the conversion rate, and this is what drives your returns and replacements ultimately. So there are brands like ASOS and Zalando who just solve it by telling you to order 5 different shirt sizes and return the ones that don't fit, for example. So they've optimized around the good return experience. But I think convincing the customer to place the order in the first place is still something that we need to work on. Payments is something that I used to think that would need improvements, but with Apple Pay, Google Wallet, that became Google Pay recently, and the payment request in the browser, I think this is getting much better already. So I would say I hope that someone finds a way to visualize products better. Maybe this is something for AR, the augmented reality, to solve. Maybe it's something for WebGL and rendering 3D graphics in the browser to solve. I don't really have a solution, but I hope it will get better.
I think from the technological point of view, in the spirit of having better experience, the PWA standard is becoming more and more important. So the promise is obviously that you would be able to at least browse browse the product in offline mode, then even buy them in offline mode, and then once you get your internet connection back, you would really buy it. So PWA is definitely one of the big trends currently.
Yeah, I agree, especially in emerging markets like India, where many people only have a mobile device. There's no laptop to continue the purchase process on, and the internet coverage may be sparse or non existent if you're traveling abroad. So you may want to purchase something and your only internet access is a cafe that you visit twice a day. So yeah, I agree with mobile devices and PWA and offline.
Yeah, to your point about the experience of making sure that the product that you're buying is going to suit your needs. I was recently in the situation of buying a refrigerator and having to break out the measuring tape every which way and then trying to think about, okay, well, what happens when I open the doors, but just something that's easily overlooked. So
yeah,
definitely room for improvement on that front. In terms of your own business and your work on Saleor, what are some of the features or improvements or new services that you have planned for the future?
Yeah, I think we can reveal currently that there's a next step to what we believe should be the right approach to e-commerce from the development point of view. And for as long as Saleor is going to be there, for as long obviously as Mirumee is going to be there, which we forecast for a really long time, then we want actually our developers to work with something more out of the box. And by that I mean that we will be releasing the software as a service version of Saleor. This is especially important in the spirit of spending more time on thinking about the things that really matters for brands, which are those experiences and the ways to make your customers happier instead of just taking care of the technology in the background, like scaling, making sure that the site performs well in all the peaks and during the major events. So we're really excited about that because this is something that we want to use for ourselves as well. But there was a big interest in our community as well, and I think I'm happy to say that beginning of April we officially started to work on the first version. And if you into modern e-commerce, you like working with the front end, looking for enterprise grade platform that actually delivers both great technology underneath and experience in terms of the dashboard, for instance, then say you might be interested in Saleor Cloud. This is how we actually call it currently.
right. So this is an answer to customers who approach us with the problem I've mentioned before, that they would like to use the platform, but they don't want the maintenance to become their job. So they don't necessarily want to hire staff that is working in development and operations on the backend side. They just want to customize the UX and provide something that is nice for the customers to use.
Yeah, we want to also incorporate all of those things that we have mentioned, like data-driven, actually, e-commerce with easy ways of creating new front ends and new touch points, and easy ways of measuring of performance of those in the real life scenarios. So yeah, if you are interested, we should have the splash page out soon, and you can be the first one to know signing up for our newsletter.
Right, and on the open source front, we're currently working on actually an interface for content translation. So for multi language sites, you would be able to provide separate product names, descriptions, and attribute values for different languages.
Oh yeah, the open source actually plans are pretty pretty heavy for this year as well. I mean, we are revealing the new dashboard soon. Already, we actually already revealed that, but we are still working on matching the functionality between the old dashboard and the new one. Part of this is, as Patryk just mentioned, the multi-language interface that we want to provide. There are many other great things coming into Saleor soon. Just follow our Twitter account and there is also some indication of those changes in the pull requests that are being opened, but we'll be releasing those updates quite often this year.
Yeah, we work in the open, so we can always preview what we're up to and provide feedback on that on our GitHub account.
And are there any other aspects of the work that you're doing at Mirumee or on Saleor or the e-commerce industry in general that we didn't discuss yet that you'd like to cover before we close out the show?
I think it's really interesting in Python currently, the GraphQL state of play. I think there is no one good answer to GraphQL. I think this battle between language-driven approach and the schema-driven approach is still a new thing even in JavaScript world. So I think Ariadne library is the answer on Python world towards schema-driven GraphQL development. And yeah, we will run a workshop soon on DjangoCon Europe, showing how Ariadne can be used with asynchronous frameworks, ASGI like Starlet, and also with Django and Django channels. I think this is a quite interesting space to watch if you are interested in web development.
Yeah, I'm very excited about asynchronous programming in Python, and I'm hoping that Django will eventually catch up, or that it gets replaced by something that is of equal quality, but making use all of the async IO improvements that we get. I'm also looking forward to static typing in Python because it's currently kind of there, but it's in great disarray, and the syntax is just not there. I mean, I'm half a Python programmer and half a TypeScript programmer, and I'm just jealous of TypeScript every time I have to write Python code.
All right. Well, for anybody who wants to follow along with the work that you're doing or get in touch, I'll have you add your preferred contact information to the show notes. And with that, I'll move us into the picks. And this week, I'm going to choose the movie Wreck-It Ralph, Ralph Breaks the Internet. I watched that with my family recently, and it was very well done, hilarious, had a lot of interesting ways of representing different aspects of internet use and internet culture. So definitely recommend that. And so with that, I'll pass it to you, Mirek. Do you have any picks this week?
Yeah, I got something more serious, I suppose, but not that serious either. It's a guide to the good life, The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy. This is the book that I'm currently reading, and I highly recommend it. And that would be it.
And Patryk, do you have any picks this week?
I have a more technical recommendation. I'm currently reading finally got around to reading a book called Release It, Design and Deploy Production-Ready Software by the Pragmatic Bookshelf. And I highly recommend it as a read to anyone who builds systems that work with any user input, but especially websites.
Well, thank you both very much for taking the time today to join me and discuss the work that you've been doing on Saleor and at Mirumee. It's definitely been interesting and educational for me, so I appreciate that, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Tobias, for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.